I'm going to start the list of the great anarchists with Diogenes of Sinope, or Sinope. City still exists in modern day Turkey, I believe. And is Diogenes the Cynic an anarchist? Exactly, extremely, totally, clearly. We don't actually have his books, though books were attributed to him. Um, what we have is accounts by others of what he said. And I think whether or not he's an anarchist per se, like an opponent of the existence of government, he was certainly an extreme anti-authoritarian. He's one of my favorite figures in the history of philosophy. It's amazing that he even exists in the history of philosophy. And one reason for that is, all right, so I think that anti-authoritarianism is coeval with authoritarianism. I think that anarchism has existed as long as governments have existed. And if you think not, I think you don't know our species that well, okay? Like when someone is exercising authority, there's someone's going like, in virtue of what are you exercising authority? And maybe you think that the answer, like it's God's will, is good enough to fool all the people all the time. And I'll just tell you, no, I don't think so. I think there's been anti-authoritarian as long as there have been authoritarians, anarchists as long as there have been statists, and we don't know much about them because the statists burn the anarchists and their books. So these first two examples, I guess I'm going to do two separate episodes on Diogenes and Lao Tzu. I mean, in a way, you got to figure out like how they came to be preserved at all. I guess for Diogenes, the way he came to be preserved is sort of as a anti or super Socrates. Like if Socrates didn't give a shit what anybody ever thought of him or something like that. He's also the funniest philosopher, certainly of ancient Greece. And that also maybe accounts for his preservation. Also, I mean, a range of positions from ancient Greece was preserved, partly because of the fragmentary nature of the political situation. And then by the time you get to the Romans or whatever, they're more interested than worried about Greek philosophy. You know what I'm saying? Like, they don't think the Cynics are going to come and overthrow the Roman Empire. So they're not totally against reproducing, naming, for amusement purposes, the positions of Diogenes the Cynic, who famously, slept in a barrel in the Agora at Athens, tub, I don't know, different terms here, masturbated in public because, and said something like, I just wish that my hunger could be satisfied by just rubbing my belly like that, didn't give a shit what anybody thought of him ever. And so there has to be a character like that. He's almost more like a character, invented character than a historical figure in some ways, I think. Just a complete, someone who dares to be free, who dares to be himself, and dares to do what he contends is natural in the face of gigantic social political pressure. All right, so one thing I want to talk about is him in relation to this book and the concept of Parrhesia. Parrhesia? I'll spell it out in the description. Our fearless speech, transgressive speech, bold speech, defiant speech, of which Diogenes of Sinope is the greatest example in lots of ways. Right. So one way he survives is that I guess the way his interactions with Alexander the Great are portrayed. These are the most famous things in Diogenes in a lot of ways. Okay, so I mean, and I'm working from the later historian Diogenes Laertius, who shares a name. That's all. Diogenes Laertius, and then also Dio. These are early AD, 200 AD or before, historians, intellectual historians, and they are the basic sources of our information about Diogenes. So the most famous thing is this one. When he was sunning, this is Diogenes Laertius, when he was sunning himself in the Cranium, in the center of Athens somewhere, Alexander came and stood over him and said, "Ask of me any boon you like," because Alexander is portrayed as an admirer of Diogenes the Cynic, who was the only person who was brave enough to tell Alexander the truth. Or there might have been other people who were brave enough to tell Alexander the truth, but they got executed. Okay, but for whatever reason, like I think Alexander, the way it's portrayed in Dio, it's like he heard about this wise man who doesn't give a shit what anybody thinks about him, who has a kind of power in a way that Alexander is capable of envying. The power to act and speak with total freedom. It's like Diogenes has nothing. Alexander has the world. And in a way, they are similar because they are enabled by their position to reject all the common wisdom around them. Okay, so Alexander comes and he comes to Athens. He finds Diogenes, and he says, I hear you're the most wise man. What do you want? I'll give you anything you want. Do you want me to endow a school for you? Do you want me to get your writings out there and stuff like this? Or what is it? And Diogenes goes, I want you to get out of my sunlight, right? I'm trying to sun myself here. I'm trying to bask a little bit. You're in the way, dude. Get out of my sunlight, which just means like, get away from me. Okay? Any boon you like. The emperor of the world says, ask for any boon you like, and the answer is, I want you out of my face. All right. In the Dio, okay, so that's what I'm calling anti-authoritarianism in an extremely vivid way. Okay, and so this is an amazing thing that Alexander's response to that, as portrayed, and the fact that Diogenes did exist and didn't get executed, I guess. His response is, wow, like really, this is why I came here, to see someone who doesn't care about the conventions, doesn't care about what all these other people care about, like whether he lives or dies, right, or whether the emperor of the world is angry at him or whatever. This is a man above the social and the political. I mean, Dio portrays it quite a bit worse. He has Diogenes call Alexander a bastard. Okay, so like, comes up, gets in his light. He goes like, ask me any boon you like. Well, first of all, I'm telling you, you're a fucking bastard. Okay? Now, and you're a bastard playing at being a king, like a child with a paper crown. Papyrus crown? A toy crown. A fake crown. You can't say that to Alexander the Great and survive. All right, you bastard. Now, of course, he does go on because he's actually extremely clever in these things, like a wit, constant wit. We could give some examples if this was about Diogenes in general and not about his anti-authoritarianism. But then he goes on, like, as Alexander presses him on a bastard? Are you insulting my mother? And he says, well, it seems to me like you can't have a human father because you're just so amazing, okay? Your father must be Zeus or some kind of hero or something like that. Okay, so then Alexander's actually happy to be called a bastard. So making Alexander the Great happy to be called a bastard, that's a considerable accomplishment, I guess. And that's Parrhesia, speaking truth to power, speaking the truth, cost what it may. You know, they ask in Diogenes Laertius, what they ask Diogenes, what's the most beautiful thing in the world? He replies, Parrhesia, freedom of speech, total freedom, to defy all verbal conventions. And to speak truth to the powerful, and there's no better example of that than Diogenes dealing with Alexander. All right. It punctures all the illusions of earthly power, actually. Even though that thing where he's taking back the bastard thing, which is comedy, right? But what he's doing is puncturing all the illusions of earthly power. This doesn't come from the gods. All right, it comes from people's delusions, dude. And if people didn't have these delusions, you'd be gone in a minute, okay? With your little game playing king or whatever. Like y'all are like little children or whatever, where one of you is the absolute commander or whatever. Like that can all disintegrate tomorrow, and it will, and it doesn't mean anything. That's not the way people should live. We should live naturally, okay, whatever the hell that means. I'm going to read some quotes and just from Diogenes Laertius on Diogenes the Cynic, and maybe just give a little glosses. All things belong, because he's a very radical figure, and it's sneaky with the wit and the constant transgression. But there's like a real serious, interesting philosophy under here. All things belong to the gods, says Diogenes. The wise are the friends of the gods, and friends hold things in common. Therefore, all things belong to the wise. Okay, so actually what I think that is, and he gives longer versions of this, and in Dio as well. It's a screed against private property. For the wise, there is no such thing as private property. It's all the property of God. All right, that's pretty radical stuff. This is my favorite moment in the history of philosophy, probably. When someone declared that motion was impossible, he got up and walked around. I won't do this because I've done this a million times, and it's in various books of mine and stuff like this, and it's not directly anarchist. To prove the existence of motion, you got up and walked around. That's because all these Parmenides, Zeno and Parmenides, had proven that motion is impossible. To which he says, you don't even believe that. You're not even brave enough to say what you do believe, and you're not even brave enough to affirm your own experience. Okay? So it does have an anti-authoritarian flavor, as well as an excellent piece of epistemology. Dionysius the Stoic, maybe I should have started with this, says that after a battle, he was seized and dragged off to Philip, the father of Alexander, the original king of Macedon. And being asked who he was, he replied to Philip, I am a spy upon your insatiable greed. Who are you? Well, I'm someone who's just watching you be greedy all day. For this, he was admired and set free. And maybe that's why Alexander comes to him later. And that's all I can say is like, he lucked out. Okay, this Philip and Alexander people, pretty unique in the history of kings. When someone was extolling the good fortune of Callisthenes and saying what splendor he shared in the suite of Alexander, not so, said Diogenes, but rather ill fortune, for he breakfasts and dines when Alexander thinks fit. I'm free, but this high-level official in Alexander's court is a slave. He eats when Alexander says. He says what Alexander tells him to say. I'm free because I eat whenever I want, and I say anything I want, including to Alexander. Alexander once came to him and sat opposite him and said, I am Alexander the great king. And he replied, I am Diogenes the Cynic. He's portrayed as kind of a hyper-Socrates and an anti-Plato. And he spends a lot of time attacking Plato. And I like that, and I like it as an anarchist, because Plato is a fucking totalitarian. Look back at some of my shit, like episode 2 of Totalitarians of Western Philosophy. I've done a bunch of slapping Plato things. Nothing could be more obvious than that the Republic gives a totalitarian system, and nothing could be more obvious than that system would disgust Diogenes. Some authors affirm that the following also belongs to him. Following witticism. That Plato saw him washing lettuces. He would have been contemporary Plato. Plato saw him washing lettuces. Younger contemporary Plato? And came up to him and quietly said to him, had you paid court to Dionysus, the tyrant, you wouldn't now be washing lettuces, as Plato did pay court to Dionysus, the tyrant. You can see why they would have liked each other, really, although they've had a falling out. And he, with equal calmness, made the answer, had you paid court to Dionysus, you wouldn't now be washing lettuces. If you had washed lettuces, you wouldn't have paid court to Dionysus. If you just stayed here and do what you needed to do to eat, you wouldn't have gone and been a sycophant for that tyrant, which shows a lot about your philosophy, Plato. He's portrayed as a cosmopolitan. Asked where he came from, he said, I'm a citizen of the world. That's also a very sort of anarchist position, right? Like, I'm not a citizen of Athens, definitely not because I'm foreign born. I'm not a citizen of Sinope because I actually been exiled from there for debasing the currency, adulterating the currency, which is a metaphor as well as a crime. And that's what Diogenes Laertius makes of it, this debasing the currency. That was the gist of his conversation, Diogenes says, at the end of his treatment. And it was plain that he acted accordingly, adulterating currency in very truth, showing you that money wasn't real and shit, allowing convention no such authority as he allowed to natural right, and asserting that the manner of life he lived was the same of that of Heracles, who when he preferred liberty to everything. So the manner of life that Diogenes demonstrated in Athens, and that, Diogenes Laertius and many others reproduce, have it in their mind as a legend. The basic message that Diogenes Laertius takes of it is that the ultimate value is liberty, which I must say is not even a value in Plato, actually. I mean, Plato says liberty looks really beautiful, doesn't it? It's wonderful, It looks really attractive. You probably want it, don't you? But it's really, really bad for you. And it's really, really bad for everyone. Liberty is license, is sin, is terrible. And what we really need is a fucking totalitarian group of lying philosopher kings to control everybody's knowledge and action. Diogenes is just the opposite of that. So I make that a version, an early version, or at least an early spirit of anarchism. Yeah, like I say, next I'll do Lao Tzu and talk about and some Chuangzi too and stuff, and maybe some Lietzi and stuff a little bit, and talk about Taoism and anti-statism, Taoism and anarchism, which I think runs very deep. Maybe it's older than the Cynics. Maybe I should have started there, but anyway, that'll be next.